In 1986, a Massachusetts family was experiencing weird noises throughout their home. Furniture was being moved, along with malicious messages being written on their walls in what appeared to be blood. All without any signs of a break in. On snowy days, there weren't even footprints in the snow leading to or away from the home. The family consisted of the father, Frank Bowen, and his two daughters, 15-year-old Tina Bowen and 9-year-old Karen Bowen. The mother of the family had passed away due to a horrible cancer, leaving the family devastated. This tragedy made Frank Bowen solely responsible for his two daughters financially, leading to him working longer hours. This will come into play later. On a typical day, his two daughters went to a nearby school for around 8 hours, then returned home shortly afterwards, where they hung out together in their family home, a nice middle class home on Elm Street with many other houses close by. What the family didn't know was there was a dangerous young man slinking through many of the neighborhood houses, stealing items and being a neighborhood menace. He also happened to live on the same street as the Bowens, just a little ways down. It also happens that he went to the same school as Tina. Even worse, he developed an unhealthy fixation and obsession with her. From here on out, there's a good deal of mixing of facts and exaggeration that I'm going to try to correct as much as I possibly can. I'll briefly mention what aspects of the case are unproven to the best of my knowledge from here on out. The dangerous guy's name was Daniel LaPlante. He was 16 years old, and many of the townspeople who knew him described him as disheveled, greasy, and just plain odd. Unbeknownst to them, Daniel had a dark and traumatic past. Daniel was born May 15, 1970 in Townsend, Massachusetts. He grew up in a household with his stepfather, David Moore, and his biological mother, Elaine Moore, as well as two unnamed siblings. From a young age, his father allegedly began abusing him sexually, physically, and psychologically on a regular basis. When his stepfather came into the picture, the abuse is said to have continued in a similar manner, although the extents of the stepfather's abuse are not fully specified. At an early age, Daniel was diagnosed with dyslexia. This fact, along with the previously mentioned abuse, led Daniel to struggle heavily both socially and academically. Throughout his adolescent and teenage years, Daniel neglected basic hygiene and appearance practices. For example, he wouldn't take regular showers, making him appear greasy, unkempt, and off-putting, which added to his inability to socialize with his peers. When his peers did interact with him, he was said to respond in an odd manner. These factors led him to become referred to as the creepy and weird kid at school by his classmates. School officials took notice of his abnormal behavior and referred him to a psychiatrist. It's unclear how much Daniel's parents were involved with this process or how well the school looked into the psychiatrist he was referred to. Seeing a psychiatrist could have been a small light in Daniel's otherwise dark life, but his visits over the next year with the psychiatrist turned into a horrible experience. His sessions with the psychiatrist turned sexual, and the psychiatrist began abusing Daniel for around 1 year. This sent Daniel's mental state even further downhill. Around his early teenage years, Daniel became a neighborhood thief. As a sort of twisted hobby, he would break into houses within his neighborhood and steal valuables, mostly while the owners were gone. Soon after, he added a new element to his burglaries. He would make it obvious to the homeowners that someone had been in their home while they were out. Not only would he continue stealing items, but he would leave half-consumed food and drinks littered around their home, rearrange their furniture, and it was also said he would use their bathroom without flushing. It was as if he wanted the owners to know someone had invaded their space and wanted them to feel uncomfortable in their very own home, a kind of psychological torture to the homeowners. He performed this disturbed routine on dozens of houses throughout this time. If he wasn't stealing from neighbors, he would be in the woods wandering around. One neighbor of Daniel's stated that the only place he would ever see Daniel was in the woods. Daniel continued with his odd behavior and twisted hobby into 1986. As dark as this case has been so far, this is where the story takes an even darker turn. Before we fully get into it, there's a few contradictions I came across. A few articles mistakenly refer to the family as the Andrews family. This is not true. Police associated with the area and the case state that it was in fact the Bowen family. Secondly, the story of the Bowen family's initial meetings with Daniel seem to differ. In some instances, Tina and Daniel were friends, with Daniel wanting more. Seeing as how they were friends, Daniel got a few good looks inside of the Bowen household, which will be important later. When schoolmates found out about their relationship, they informed Tina that Daniel was facing assault charges. This caused Tina to stop seeing Daniel altogether. The other version of events states that either through his burglary hobby or some other means, Daniel obtained the Bowen household number. From there, he called Tina and claimed he was given her home number from a mutual friend who went to the same school as them. The frequency of these calls between the pair increased, and during these calls, Daniel claimed he was a strong, good looking, popular, smart, athletic boy. Any compliment you could possibly think of, Daniel claimed it as one of his traits. The conversations went on for up to a few weeks. Tina got comfortable speaking to Daniel over the phone, and the pair decided to meet. Daniel showed up at Tina's doorstep, and upon Tina answering the door and looking at the boy before her, he was nothing like he was described on the phone. He had large amounts of acne, was pale, greasy, and disheveled. Despite being lied to, Tina allowed Daniel to take her on a date to the local fair. It's here that Daniel learned of Tina's mother passing away due to cancer. Upon learning this fact, he pressed Tina for more details, showing a very unhealthy interest. He wanted to know how much Tina and her family suffered from her mother's passing and kept asking for more and more details, almost as if he was relishing in hearing about how painful it was for the family. Feeling uncomfortable, Tina made an excuse to leave and avoided Daniel altogether after these events. Now, whichever version of events you believe, it still led to the same depraved outcome. One night while home alone, Tina and Karen decided to attempt to communicate with their deceased mother via a Ouija board. This process is sometimes called a seance. It refers to the practice of trying to communicate with spirits. The pair didn't think anything would come of it. They performed the seance and started directing questions toward their mother's spirit. After the first few questions, nothing seemed to happen. To their surprise, though, they eventually started hearing knocks in response to their questions from the walls of the home. They got excited and kept asking more questions and received more knocks in response. When their father returned home, they explained what happened. Frank brushed it off as being in their heads due to them missing their mother so badly. The knocks had also stopped while he was home, furthering his belief. After this night, the knocks would consistently continue anytime Frank was not home, and sometimes even when he was, but it was usually at nighttime when everyone was trying to sleep. The knocks became such a regular occurrence that it was starting to really irritate the girls. Soon after, when they would return home from being out, they noticed furniture was moved to other areas of the house. In addition to these bizarre happenings, the girls would also find half-drank glasses of milk and other food items left out. When they were watching TV, the channels would start to rapidly change. Trails of pennies were strewn about randomly. On another day, upon returning to the house, the bathtub was plugged and contained urine. They began to think they had awakened a demon with their seance that was now tormenting them and not their mother like they originally thought. All of these happenings occurred when Frank wasn't home. This led him to not believing the girls or thinking they were doing these actions themselves out of their grief for their deceased mother. These happenings occurred for some time but soon escalated. On another evening, the tapping resumed while the girls were home alone again, only this time it was coming from the basement. The girls, scared out of their minds but also wanting to put an end to the tapping, slowly made their way downstairs armed with kitchen knives. When they reached the basement, they saw a message scrawled in what looked like blood on the basement wall. It said, "I'm in your room. Find me." The girls, completely terrified, fled the house entirely and ran into their neighbor's home where they called their father. Frank arrived at the house, and after months of these claims with no evidence, he became irritable. He blamed the girls again, believing they were struggling mentally due to their mother's death. Only now they had defaced his wall, further angering him. He demanded they undergo counseling to aid with their mental state. Yet another event occurred weeks later on December 8th, 1986. Knocks began coming from Tina's room while they had a friend over, and when the trio went to the room, there was a message on the bedroom wall. "I'm back. Find me if you can," scrawled in red. Again, the girls ran to their neighbor's home and called their father. The father again pinned the blame on Tina and Karen. However, Frank would soon start to believe them. Frank, with his two girls and their friend behind him, entered the home to find a man in a bedroom closet. He was wielding a hatchet in one hand and a wrench in the other. He was wearing a furry jacket and had spiked up hair. His face was also crudely painted. This man, upon being discovered, jumped into action. He threatened and corralled Frank and the three girls into a bedroom where Tina escaped out of the room's window and ran to the neighbor's house where she called police. The man, upon seeing her escape, vanishes and leaves the rest of the family unharmed, where they then evacuate the house while police arrive. There's another version of events that are similar where Frank encounters a man wearing his dead wife's dress, a blonde wig, and makeup. However, the former version of events are what police were told upon arriving to the home. When police spoke to the Bowen family, they were obviously shaken and got some details wrong. They described the intruder as 6 feet tall and between 17 and 26 years old. At the time, they didn't know who had threatened them due to the attacker's disguise. Police entered the home and inspected the scrawled messages. They found they had been written in mayonnaise and ketchup. They then utilized a canine unit but came up empty in their search. Unsurprisingly, the family chose to evacuate their home and stayed with either friends or family for a few days. On December 10th, just 2 days after they were held hostage in their own home, Frank pulled up to the house to retrieve a few things that had been forgotten. Upon pulling down the driveway, he saw a man's face in the window that quickly retreated out of sight. Upon seeing this, he called police, who came out shortly after. An officer named Stephen Bezenson arrived, and as he was pulling in, he could see Frank outside frantically pointing to the house. In his head, he already knew. He's going to say he saw the guy in a window. Bezenson retrieved the house key from Frank and began checking the snow around the home for tracks. There were none. He then entered the home, and admittedly he had some doubts about the Bowens' claims, but all of those doubts were swept away upon entering. On the right-hand wall, immediately upon entering the home, there was a family picture pinned to the wall with a knife. On the picture, written in magic marker, it said, "I'm still here. Come find me." When the officer turned, he saw yet another family picture, again with a knife through it. This one said, "I'm going to kill you all." Officer Bezenson then wisely got his bearings and called for backup. Chief David Young and a Sergeant Jim Scott came to the house. All three officers entered the house and performed a search with no results. Officer Bezenson is quoted as saying, "That bastard is still here. We're missing something." Upon going through the house one more time, he saw a wall that was used to cover the bathroom piping. He knew that there was a possible 6 to 8 inches of space behind the wall. He looked behind it with his flashlight, gun ready. He immediately noticed a pile of clothing and food wrappers strewn behind the wall. Shortly after moving his light down the space, he was faced with 16-year-old Daniel LaPlante, unmoving and unemotional even though he now had a gun pointed at him. Daniel was then apprehended at gunpoint. Police would later state that Daniel had just enough room to sit in a crouch position and had even been sleeping in that way. In some reports, the space expanded to other areas of the house and was dotted with multiple peepholes to allow Daniel to view the Bowens while he tormented them. He also liked to observe Tina, as he still had an unhealthy obsession with her, although I couldn't verify any of these claims. Luckily, no one was physically harmed, but I imagine this kind of crap left the Bowen family with mental scarring for life. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end here. Daniel was placed into a juvenile detention facility for a short while on a $10,000 bail. It's reported that his mother remortgaged her house to afford bail. Once he was released, he resumed his burglary routines. Just 2 months after being released, during one of his routine burglaries on December 1st, 1987, he broke into the Gustafson residence. Upon breaking in, he was greeted by a frightened 33-year-old pregnant woman named Priscilla Gustafson and her 5-year-old boy William. Daniel, using a firearm stolen from another residence, ushered Priscilla into her bedroom where he tied her to the bed. He then put William in a closet in another room of the house and told him to stay there. He returned to Priscilla and forced himself on her, then shot her point blank in the head twice through a pillow, killing her. He then went back to the closet where he put William and guided him into a nearby bathroom, where he then filled the tub and proceeded to drown him. As he was leaving the house, he ran into the Gustafsons' 7-year-old daughter Abigail, who had just returned from school. He grabbed her, led her to a different bathroom, and drowned her as well. Daniel then went home, ate dinner, and then went to his niece's birthday party as though nothing had even happened. Andrew Gustafson, the father, returned home from work and saw a sight that no one should ever have to witness. He discovered his wife face down, dead on their bed. He left the house and called police, not wanting to look for his 2 children, as he ultimately knew they were more than likely dead within the house. Daniel was linked to the murders quickly. A police canine picked up his scent from a pillow on the bed where Priscilla had been killed. The dog then followed the scent to a pile of rocks within the woods behind the Gustafson home. There, they found still wet clothing and a pair of gloves. From there, the dogs tracked the scent right up to Daniel LaPlante's door. Sneaker prints found heading into the LaPlante home matched ones outside of the Gustafson residence. These facts, along with other evidence found at the scene, gave officers enough reason to issue a warrant for the arrest of Daniel LaPlante. Daniel, at some point, probably seeing the police activity and knowing he was wanted, ran off into the woods to hide. Lynn McGovern, a woman whose house was right near the woods, was frightened by the possibility of the fugitive being nearby and asked for police to escort her inside. Lieutenant Tom Lane agreed to escort her inside. When the pair entered the home and Tom searched the house, he came face to face with Daniel, who was now armed with a revolver, shotgun, and a rifle that he had stolen while on the run. Daniel didn't expect to come face to face with an officer so soon and dropped the shotgun out of fear before jumping through a window onto a nearby garage roof and then retreating back into the woods. Some hours later, Tom responded to reports of a suspicious person near Elm Street, the street LaPlante lived on. Upon arriving, he heard a woman screaming in a nearby home. Daniel had taken a woman, Pam Michaela, hostage at gunpoint and then forced her into an orange van and told her to drive him out of the area. Before this event, he had tried to take another woman hostage and steal her vehicle but was unsuccessful. Fortunately, Pam was able to jump out of the moving van and escape Daniel soon after, with officers now in hot pursuit of Daniel. The van was tracked to the nearby town of Ayers but was empty. Police began to fan out, and as they were checking a nearby dumpster, they found Daniel inside. They held him at gunpoint, which forced him to finally surrender. 1 year later in court, Daniel was immensely unlikable due to the horrific nature of his actions, as you guys could probably guess. However, he somehow made people hate him even more through his courtroom demeanor. He was constantly seen smirking and showing absolutely no remorse for what he had done. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, one for each Gustafson family member he coldly murdered. He has tried appealing the sentencing since, but has been denied every time. The Gustafson family and the Bowen families were never the same after encountering Daniel. Andrew Gustafson died of cancer Thursday, May 22, 2014. He ended up remarrying in 1982, 2 years after the tragedy, and left behind his wife Carol Gustafson and his 2 daughters Laura and Holly. All the way up until his death, he wore 2 wedding rings, one for his current wife and the other for Priscilla. Frank Bowen at some unspecified point left the 2 girls and became distant. It's unclear what this means exactly. Did he wait for them to both turn 18 and then leave, or did something else happen before then? It's not entirely clear from what I found. He ended up passing away at only 50 years old. Tina Bowen, the older Bowen sister, has decided to stay out of the public eye, although there are a few sources that state she has moved on and that she doesn't hold ill feelings toward LaPlante. Karen Bowen seems to have started to recover mentally as much as one could given the circumstances. She married and is now known as Karen Roshlow. Unfortunately, she is now battling stage 4 kidney disease and will more than likely need a kidney transplant. She pretty recently created a GoFundMe in an attempt to raise money for her battle. I'm a very small channel currently, but I'll go ahead and put that link in the description and pinned comment for visibility. If you've watched this far, I thank you very much. I will see you guys in the next case. This is Jeremy the Crime Historian checking out. Peace.